Hello. Welcome to the first episode of Peace in Progress, because peace isn't perfect, it's a practice. This show is about the messy, beautiful work of connection, how we communicate, how we grow, and how we transform conflict into something meaningful. Because let's be honest, peace isn't about avoiding the hard stuff. It's about learning to move through it with clarity, curiosity, and heart. For the past 3 decades, I've been helping people, whether in their homes, their schools, or workplaces, turn conflict into connection and remove the obstacles that keep us from love. It's my work, my purpose, and my passion. In this show, we're going to explore how to create deeper peace within ourselves, with one another, and ultimately in the world around us. Because let's be real, there's never been a better time to do this work. And the rewards, they're bigger than you can imagine. So let's dive in. To help me kick off this first show, I've invited someone really special, someone who's been in my life longer than almost anyone. We've been having deep, meaningful, and sometimes ridiculous conversations for years. And today, I'm so excited to bring him into this space with me. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Ashley, how are you today?
Doing great. I'm so happy to see you. So to let the listeners know, Tom Nesbita is my oldest and dearest friend, and honestly, one of the smartest and most thoughtful people I know. He's an ethnographer, linguist, and writer who uses cultural teachings and dynamics from around the world to help people become the better version of themselves they want to see in the world. Tom's journey in self-improvement began as a small unit leader in the U.S. Marine Corps and Army, where he thrived on helping his team grow. His passion for mentorship led him to advise clients across government, corporate, and educational sectors, building initiatives that maximize individual potential for collective benefit. With leadership experience in 23 countries across 6 continents, he brings a wealth of insight into resilience, trauma, and disaster recovery, sharing lessons from his own battle with PTSD after serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. Tom, thank you so much for joining me today for the launch of this podcast. Talking with you over the years has helped me immensely, and you have a way of seeing the world that leaves me thinking differently. I'm excited for our conversation.
Well, I'm glad I could be here, and thank you for having me, Ashley. I really appreciate it.
So, to kick us off, let's talk about the most basic question. What are we talking about when we talk about peace? For me, peace has never been about the absence of conflict. It's about something deeper, the presence of inner harmony, clarity, and conscious engagement. It's why Thich Nhat Hanh's words, peace is every step, resonate so much. It reminds me that peace isn't like something you arrive at or a destination. It's something we practice every single moment. And I know you've spent a lifetime thinking about ideas like this too. And you've experienced and seen some of the worst conflicts in the world. So can you share with our listeners, what does peace mean to you?
Thank you. I think first and foremost, peace for me is the natural respiratory pause between conflicts on the physical level, if you will. It's that brief respite between arguments, disagreements, whether those are personal or geopolitical. But on a deeper, more energetic level, I think peace is ultimately resonance. Resonance, finding a good tune to strum within yourself, and then finding somebody or the somebodies around you to do that with as well.
Wow. So in that space between conflict where peace resides, what is happening? Is that a space where people are finding attunement?
I think maybe it's finding attunement. I think it's also just taking a breath to rest and collect their energy. If you think about it, peace is on the opposite side of the same coin as conflict, right? They go hand in hand, yin and yang, high and low, etc. And I think peace is just that breath in between conflicts. And conflict rages throughout the universe, whether it's at the microbial level, with viruses trying to attack a body, the personal level, when you're in dissonance with a partner or a friend or a coworker, again, nation states, geopolitical, conflict runs the gamut. across all spectrums. And so peace is the quiet in between the conflicts. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things I focus on when I'm working with clients and with myself, frankly, is in that respite between. That's where we take our wounds and we take the harms that we've experienced or the harms that we've caused, and we work on learning lessons,
Hmm.
and really trying to figure out like what caused this conflict, what's at the heart of it, and what in what way does it serve me, and in what way does it help me grow. Someone once said to me years ago that conflict is the compost that we add to the soil that allows us to grow. So I think that that respite between is the growing space. Would you
I
agree with
agree.
that?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
cool, cool. Well, we're already off to a great start. Thank you.
Right.
So, working with people in conflict, I can see that there's often like a really intense and totally understandable focus on what's wrong in relationships versus what's right or what can be. And that's one of the first things that I try to shift when I'm working with clients is instead of this deep attention to what's wrong, we want to really look to see what's possible for us. Again, going back to that compost idea, let's grow from this. A lot of conflicts, people, I see it's very, very common for people to just walk away, to throw up their hands and say, well, this relationship is broken because we had a conflict. When in fact, the relationship could become like something unbelievable because of the conflict. So,
Mhm.
as a linguist and someone who helps people cultivate more effective language, how does the way we talk about conflict shape the way we experience it?
Great question. I think the first part of that is that we talk about conflict too much. Our language that we use influences our thoughts, and and our thoughts influences our actions. So thoughts, words, and deeds are a family connected together. And if you look around in our society today, modern society, you hear pretty much nothing but conflict, whether it's socioeconomic lines, along political lines, along religious lines, along geopolitical lines. Everybody's talking about conflict, and people are tired of conflict, but they're not really talking about resolving conflict or talking about peace. If they do speak about peace and resolving conflict, it's almost as an afterthought or an I wish we could do that, instead of harnessing the power of language and its relationships to thought and deed that follow on, and making peace and conflict resolution the actual first sentence that comes out of their mouth. And I think if we
Yeah.
I think if we flip the order and focus on peace and conflict resolution rather than the problems that break us apart, that's where you make your start.
Yeah, it's like people get really attached
Hmm.
to this harmful language where all they can think about and all they can focus on is they did this, I don't like them, my group against this group. And it's almost as if the belief in peace needs to be cemented into people that it's possible, and then start to use the language because without the language, without the core belief, we can't get there. That's the most basic place to start, right?
Correct, correct. And when you reinforce a word or certain phrases over and over again, especially in the negative sense, that's you programming your mind to think that way. So we have
Yeah.
to reverse the language 100%.
Yeah, and a lot of people talk about like moving into higher vibration. I'm feeling low vibe, things like that, right? But the truth is that low vibe is resentment, fear, anger, apathy, of course, is the lowest vibe. And
Mhm.
then moving up into higher vibration energy, we're talking about love and hope and joy and belief in connectedness. So I'm curious, when you, for yourself, and I'll talk about it for myself, if you have, because we all get there, we're all in low vibes sometimes. And that low vibration place makes us kind of focus on the negative. We can't hear anything beyond the negative. So for myself, I kind of withdraw from the world a little bit when I'm feeling low vibe because I only want to put good out into the world. I only want to put love in the world. And we're all human. So sometimes I fall down into that too. And I'm like thinking about conflicts. I'm thinking about what's wrong. So I withdraw a little bit. I meditate. I do yoga. I do all the things, right? I light candles. I make myself a really healthy meal. I take a long walk on the beach. I'm curious for you, how do you get yourself, if you're ever there, out of that lower vibration where you're focusing on conflict and instead focusing on hope?
Much the same way. Exercise definitely is always critical for the physical body and the mental state. Rest. There's not a lot of rest these days. We're in this frenetic, I'm always so busy society of ours, and that is having an effect on people in general. So good sleep patterns, good sleep habits, good health protocols or sleep protocols, if you will. Definitely looking within myself if I'm vibrating at a lower vibration, feeling a little bit low. I take to the journal, definitely explore some of my inner thoughts and look at the language that I use that I put down on the page, and that usually helps to exercise some of the emotions or negative feelings that I might have. Those are my top three, definitely.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I like talking about this with you is because I know that one of the core principles of the way you are in the world and the way you work is really taking responsibility for how you're showing up in the world and the
Mhm.
ripple effect that you're causing in the world. And I love that because if we show up in the world and we are talking about negative things, focusing on the disconnect between us, we have a responsibility. Like we are creating these ripples out in the larger human community that we can't take back. And, I put it this way: when we cause harm, there is a ripple effect, but also when we cause healing, there's a ripple effect. So I think about that a lot. I think about taking responsibility for my words, deeds, and actions. And it all comes from a place of being in hope rather than being in despair. So,
Mhm.
any
I love
thoughts
it.
about that before I ask you my next question?
No, I think that's a good policy. I'm a firm believer, as you know, in people taking personal responsibility. That comes from self-awareness and self-love. And once you realize that you are, whether you're an action or a reaction to a previous action, what you choose to do, what you choose to say, how you choose to act affects the stream downstream from you. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we can be a reaction to what happens to us either by learning the lesson and turning that bad thing that happened to us into something good for humanity, or we can continue harm. That is
Mhm.
totally an inflection point in everything that happens to us. Um,
I
so
agree.
yeah, so I believe that um, most of the pain of human relationships comes from a deep longing to be connected, and to remove the obstacles to love. I talk about that a lot. You've heard me talk about it a lot.
Mhm.
And all we want to know is that we belong to one another, we're safe with one another, and that we're honored for who we are when we're together. And I'm curious for you, what have you learned about human connection in your experiences, especially, coming from war experiences, coming from just this vast array of experiences? What have you learned about human connection that has surprised you the most?
The lesson that I've learned the most about human connection is that you can connect with almost anybody on the planet if you so choose. If you look past the religious lines or the ethnic lines or the linguistic lines or the geographic lines, and I've done this around the world in 23 different countries in various ways, shapes, and forms. If you get to the very basic connections that we all share. Say, for example, hey, this person sitting across the bus aisle from me, I have zero in common with, except that we breathe the same air. We all require food. We require love. We require the wearing of clothes. Even if you start at something that basic, those are great, simple, foundational ingress points that allow you to build at the very least, a tenuous connection upon which you can build other deeper things. And then maybe you start playing with the language and fumbling through their language, or trying to connect with them linguistically with hand signs and looking confused. I've seen people in countries that we were at war with, and the local citizenry openly welcomed us and wanted to work with us because they knew that there were other people within their country that they couldn't connect with and didn't have their best interests at heart. So there's always a way. You can always connect with somebody if you can drop your walls and drop your defenses and see some sort of commonality with anybody almost in the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, in my work, I have brought people across some very difficult lines in the sand that they had drawn between one another, and ultimately, there's always the sense of surprise. Like I didn't think that I had anything in common with this person,
Mm-hmm.
but we have so much in common. We have way more in common than we are different. And one thing that is kind of crazy to me is that we have these opportunities to connect with one another in relative peacetime. Like we're in relative peacetime right now, especially in our country. A lot of people feel that we're at war with one another, but we are relatively at peacetime, and people choose to stay disconnected. But then when a natural disaster happens or in the ravages of war, that is when people often, out of necessity, just leap over those boundaries between them and support and care for one another. And I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
Hard times, disasters, war have always been a chance for people to come together. They're the worst experiences that humans can experience. But again, on the flip side of that same coin, and I've seen this countless times, they also show the sheer beauty of other humans coming together. I think part of the reason we do have so much conflict is we see so much of ourselves in others that we don't like, whether
Mhm.
that be friends or family or lovers or coworkers. And then it's when everybody or the situation is at its worst that we see ourselves or the potential for ourselves to be in those situations. And I think those are some motivating factors that really encourage us to step out. And those
Yeah.
examples are throughout human history. Yeah.
And honestly, it's human nature to want to help when others
Mhm.
are in pain and when they're hurting. And that's another projection, right? We see somebody in pain or hurting, and we can immediately, almost all of us, empathize with that and say, oh my gosh, if I was that person, I would want someone to reach out and help me and hold me through this process, right? Um, and a lot of times, the thing that is stopping us from being able to do that is an inner conflict that actually nobody can help us with. We have to deal with it on our own, and we have to recognize what walls or armor or boundaries we have set around us that prevent us from making that kind comment or reaching the hand out and providing some help. And so no matter what conflict I am supporting my clients through, I always start working with the conflict within,
Mhm.
trying to help them untangle those issues that are at the heart of everything that they're experiencing. And when people untangle that inner conflict, then they can start to access healthier outer relationships. And so, from your perspective, if we want to become more peaceful people, where do we start? Like, what does that look like for you, this untangling of inner conflict?
Become vulnerable, embrace vulnerability, personal vulnerability, and the vulnerability that may be inherent to a relationship that you share with somebody.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, a lot of times people are waiting to see that you can show up vulnerably in
Mhm.
order that they can show up
Mhm.
vulnerably.
And there's
Wow.
nothing to say that you couldn't or shouldn't take the first step. It's hard. It's one of the most challenging things we can do. But when you start to learn about vulnerability and the strength that comes from it, and then the positive power that you can radiate into the world once you become vulnerable, even to yourself, it, it can change the world. I've seen it. Yeah. I'm doing it myself in my own
Amazing.
life. Thank you.
Yes, I've been watching. It's amazing. I have said for a long time that love is my superpower. Vulnerability is another superpower. Awesome. I have loved this conversation. And guess
Me
what,
too.
listeners? It is only the first half of a conversation. In our next episode, we're going to dig into something that's just as important as what peace means, which is why peace feels so hard, why we resist it, and what happens when we stop fighting the struggle and start learning from it. So join us on March 10th. We'll see you right here. Until then, and anytime, visit my website at ashleymcguire.com and feel free to send me your questions to ask and answer on air or in private. And to everyone who's listening, until next time, take a deep breath, take the next step, and know that peace is always in progress. Thank you so much, Tom. I will see you next time. Thank you so much, everybody who's watching. See you next time.
Thanks, Ashley. See you soon.